Good and evil are not fixed points on a moral compass. They are fluid, often overlapping forces that shape and reshape the human experience. The question is not merely why evil exists, but more disturbingly, why good people become evil. History offers us no shortage of unsettling examples. Ordinary citizens becoming informants in totalitarian regimes, trusted leaders sliding into corruption, loving parents drawn into cults that preach violence. These are not monsters in human skin. They are us. They were kind, loyal, principled, until they weren't. The title of this essay is not provocative for its own sake. It reflects a terrifying truth. Evil is not always committed by the clearly wicked. More often, it is enabled by those who once believed in decency, who never imagined themselves capable of cruelty. To understand how this transformation occurs is not only to ask a philosophical question, but a deeply personal one. It is a mirror we must hold up to ourselves. This inquiry begins with the ancient philosophers who believed virtue was a kind of knowledge and who wrestled with the nature of moral failure. We'll trace the evolution of moral psychology through modern thinkers like Hannah Arendt and Philip Zimbardo, who examined how context, power, and ideology corrode individual integrity. We'll explore how systems manipulate moral reasoning, how fear dulls empathy, and how the illusion of being the good one can lead people to commit unspeakable acts in the name of righteousness. But this is not an essay of despair. If people can fall, they can also rise. The same minds that justify cruelty are capable of self-reflection, repentance, and resistance. Our goal is not just to explain why good people become evil, but to uncover how they can remain good, even when the world makes it difficult. When we ask why good people become evil, it helps to start at the beginning, with the earliest thinkers who tried to understand human morality. The ancient Greek philosopher Socrates believed that people do wrong because they don't truly understand what is good. In his view, no one willingly chooses to be evil. If someone acts badly, it's because they are confused, ignorant, or mistaken. He believed that if a person really knew what was right, they would follow it. In other words, knowledge leads to virtue. This may sound too simple, but it points to something important. Socrates didn't divide people into good and bad. He saw wrongdoing as a kind of failure in understanding, not as the result of a dark heart. This idea would shape a long tradition of moral philosophy. Plato, his student, took this idea further. He believed that the soul had three parts: reason, spirit, and desire. When reason rules, the soul is in harmony. But when desire takes over, when people chase pleasure, power, or approval, things fall apart. A good person can be pulled off track if their desires become stronger than their sense of reason. So evil isn't always chosen directly. Sometimes it's the result of inner imbalance. Aristotle, another giant of ancient philosophy, had a slightly different view. He believed that being good is something we have to practice. Just like someone becomes a skilled musician by playing every day, a person becomes good by acting in good ways over time. Virtue is a habit. According to Aristotle, we aren't born virtuous or evil. We become one or the other through repeated action. That means even good people can slide into bad behavior if they stop practicing virtue. The habits we build, or fail to build, shape who we are. Later, during the early Christian period, St. Augustine added a new layer to the conversation. He believed that evil wasn't just about ignorance or poor habits, it was about the will. Augustine famously struggled with his own desires. In his book Confessions, he describes how he would do things he knew were wrong, even when he didn't want to. He wrote, "I was in love with ruin. I wanted to do it, simply because it was forbidden." For Augustine, the problem wasn't that people didn't know what was right. It was that they chose not to follow it. The will, he said, was split. A person could believe in goodness and still be drawn toward evil. That tension between wanting to do right and being pulled toward wrong became central to Christian thought for centuries. Then came a much louder, more rebellious voice, Friedrich Nietzsche. He didn't believe in dividing the world into good and evil at all. In fact, he thought those words were tools used by the weak to control the strong. In Nietzsche's view, what people call good often comes from fear, jealousy, or resentment. He argued that the so-called good people of society created morality to protect themselves from those who were bold, powerful, or creative. So in Nietzsche's eyes, becoming evil might just mean stepping outside the limits of what society has told you is acceptable. This doesn't mean Nietzsche supported cruelty or violence, but he wanted to challenge the idea that morality is always pure. Sometimes what we call evil is simply someone refusing to obey the rules that might themselves be unjust. These classical views, from Socrates to Nietzsche, give us a range of answers to our question. Maybe good people become evil because they don't know better. Maybe they are overpowered by desire or fail to practice virtue. Maybe their will is divided. Or maybe they're rejecting a system that labeled them evil for daring to live freely. What these early thinkers show us is that evil is rarely simple. It isn't always about villains or monsters. It can grow from confusion, weakness, habit, or rebellion. And most importantly, it can happen quietly, inside a person who once believed they were doing the right thing. If philosophy gives us the why, psychology often gives us the how. In this section, we turn from ancient ideas to modern experiments, real-world studies that show just how easily good people can be led down dark paths. These aren't just theories. They are observations of ordinary people, like you and me, slipping into cruelty, sometimes without even realizing it. 1. Hannah Arendt and the Banality of Evil. In 1961, the world watched as Adolf Eichmann, one of the men who helped organize the Holocaust, stood trial in Jerusalem. People expected to see a monster. Instead, they saw a soft-spoken, nervous man in glasses who claimed he was just following orders. Philosopher Hannah Arendt attended the trial and wrote about it in her famous book, Eichmann in Jerusalem. What shocked her was not how evil Eichmann looked, but how ordinary he was. He wasn't driven by hatred. He wasn't insane. He was, in many ways, a boring man who had stopped thinking for himself. Arendt called this the banality of evil. Her point was simple but unsettling. Evil doesn't always come from deep hatred. It can come from thoughtlessness, from people doing their jobs, avoiding questions, staying in their lane. Sometimes good people become evil, not because they intend to harm, but because they surrender their ability to think and judge. 2. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Philip Zimbardo. In 1971, psychologist Philip Zimbardo ran an experiment that would become one of the most disturbing in psychology. He turned the basement of Stanford University into a mock prison and assigned college students to play guards or prisoners. The plan was to run the study for 2 weeks. It had to be stopped after just 6 days. The reason? The guards, ordinary young men, quickly became cruel. They insulted prisoners, gave them pointless punishments, and even forced them to do degrading tasks. These weren't bad people. Before the experiment, none of them had shown signs of violent behavior. But once they were given power, a uniform, and the role of a prison guard, something changed. Zimbardo's conclusion was powerful. It's not just about the person, it's about the situation. Even good people can become abusive when placed in a setting that rewards domination and discourages empathy. Roles and environments shape us more than we'd like to admit. 3. Milgram's obedience study. Just a decade earlier, Another psychologist, Stanley Milgram, had tested how far people would go when following authority. He told volunteers they were helping in a memory study. Their job was to deliver electric shocks to a learner, an actor, every time they got an answer wrong. The shocks weren't real, but the volunteers didn't know that. As the shocks increased, the learner screamed in pain, begged for it to stop, and eventually went silent. And yet, over 65% of participants continued delivering shocks all the way to the highest setting, just because the researcher in a lab coat calmly told them to keep going. This experiment showed how easily people obey authority, even when their actions cause harm. It wasn't that these people enjoyed hurting others. Many were sweating, shaking, and visibly distressed. But they felt trapped, afraid to challenge the rules or the authority figure. Obedience, it turns out, can silence our conscience. 4. The power of incrementalism. One reason people fall into evil behavior is that it doesn't happen all at once. There's no dramatic moment where someone announces, "Today I become cruel." Instead, it's gradual. A little compromise here, a small lie there. One unethical choice opens the door to another. Psychologists call this the foot-in-the-door effect. If you agree to a small request, you're more likely to agree to a larger one later. The same applies to moral choices. If someone asks you to bend the rules just this once, it's easier to say yes. And the next time, it feels even more natural. This is how good people slowly shift. No alarm bells go off. They don't think of themselves as evil. They're just doing their job or going along with the group. But over time, they find themselves in a place they never imagined being. Evil sneaks in through the side door, disguised as routine. 5. Moral disengagement and self-justification. Another psychological mechanism that plays a role is called moral disengagement. This is when people mentally distance themselves from the harm they're causing. They might say, "It's not personal," or "They brought it on themselves." In war, for example, soldiers are often trained to see the enemy as less than human. This makes it easier to kill without guilt. People also use self-justification to protect their self-image. No one wants to see themselves as cruel. So instead of admitting to wrongdoing, we come up with reasons why it was okay. I had no choice. It's for the greater good. Everyone else was doing it. These mental tricks don't just defend our actions, they shape our identity. Over time, we start to believe our own excuses. We stop questioning ourselves. And once that happens, the slide into deeper harm becomes even easier. 6. The role of emotion: fear, anger, and belonging. Emotions play a huge part in moral decline. Fear can shut down our moral reasoning. When people are afraid of punishment, loss, or being left out, they often make choices they wouldn't normally consider. Anger can also cloud judgment. When someone feels wronged, betrayed, or humiliated, they may lash out, even at innocent people. They might feel their harm is justified or even righteous. Then there's the deep human need to belong. We want to be accepted by our peers, our tribe, our community. This can be a beautiful thing, but it can also lead to moral compromise. People will often do wrong if it means staying part of the group. No one wants to be the outsider, the whistleblower, the one who ruins the mood. Sometimes evil doesn't come from hatred, it comes from wanting to fit in. We've looked at how individuals can be influenced by their roles, emotions, and surroundings. But people don't exist in a vacuum. They're part of societies shaped by cultures, institutions, ideologies, and power structures. If we really want to understand why good people become evil, we have to examine the larger systems that allow, encourage, or even reward harmful behavior. Sometimes the greatest evils don't begin in the heart of a single person. They begin with an idea, a shared belief, or a political order that slowly reshapes what people think is right. 1. Ideology and groupthink. One of the most powerful forces in human behavior is ideology, a set of beliefs that explains how the world works and what our place in it should be. Ideologies aren't always bad. They can guide people toward justice, freedom, and progress. But they can also blind us. When people believe strongly in a cause, whether it's political, religious, or national, they may start to justify harmful actions for the greater good. If an enemy is seen as threatening the group's survival or values, hurting them can start to feel not just acceptable, but necessary. This is where groupthink comes in. In groupthink, people stop thinking independently. They go along with the crowd, even when they feel something is wrong. Dissent becomes dangerous. Speaking out feels like betrayal. The group becomes an echo chamber. And inside that bubble, even harmful ideas can sound reasonable. Good people who want to belong, who trust the group, and who fear being cast out may slowly adopt the group's darker views. They might not notice they've changed. Or worse, they might believe they're doing the right thing. 2. Dehumanization. The first step toward harm. Before most acts of cruelty, there's a step we often overlook: dehumanization. It's the process of seeing others as less than human, less worthy of care, dignity, or life. When someone is labeled a criminal, a parasite, a monster, or even just an other, it becomes easier to mistreat them. History is filled with tragic examples. Propaganda that compared Jewish people to rats during the Holocaust, or language that described Rwandan Tutsis as cockroaches before the genocide. These aren't just words, they're tools designed to remove empathy. When we see someone as fully human, hurting them feels wrong. But when we reduce them to a label, an enemy, or a threat, it becomes much easier to justify violence or neglect. This is why language matters. The way we talk about people, especially those we disagree with, can either open the door to compassion or close it completely. 3. Fear, scarcity, and the instinct to survive. Fear changes people. When resources are scarce, food, money, security, people shift into survival mode. In times of crisis, we often stop asking, what's the right thing to do, and start asking, what do I need to do to survive? This instinct is ancient. It comes from a time when danger was everywhere, and survival depended on quick, decisive action. But in modern life, this same instinct can lead us into moral danger. Leaders can manipulate fear to gain control. They might exaggerate threats, scapegoat certain groups, or promise protection in exchange for loyalty. When people are afraid of crime, poverty, outsiders, or losing their way of life, they're more likely to support harsh policies or ignore injustices. Even good people, under enough pressure, may choose safety over ethics. They might turn a blind eye, or worse, they might become the ones enforcing cruelty, believing it's the only way to protect what matters most. 4. Power without accountability. Another dangerous condition for evil is unchecked power. When people gain authority without limits, transparency, or oversight, they're more likely to abuse it. Power has a strange effect on the mind. It can numb empathy, inflate ego, and twist judgment. It's not that power always corrupts, but it creates a situation where corruption is easier. If someone can act without consequences, they may stop asking if what they're doing is right. This is why strong institutions like courts, free press, and independent watchdogs are so important. They help keep people honest. They shine light where there's darkness. When those systems break down or are weakened, evil finds room to grow. 5. The comfort of conformity. Sometimes evil thrives not because people actively choose it, but because they choose comfort over courage. They choose not to ask questions, not to stand up, not to make waves. It's easy to judge from the outside. I would never go along with that, we say. But when you live inside a system where everyone accepts a harmful norm, where silence is rewarded and speaking out is punished, it's incredibly hard to resist. History teaches us that many of the worst atrocities were not carried out by monsters, but by neighbours, co-workers, friends, people who stayed quiet or played along because it was safer, easier, or more comfortable than saying no. The bigger picture is that we often imagine evil as a rare and shocking thing, but many of its roots are ordinary. Fear, group loyalty, social pressure, the desire to fit in. These are everyday human experiences, and that's what makes them dangerous. When we zoom out and look at the larger systems, ideologies, institutions, political forces, we start to see how they shape the moral choices of individuals. People don't become evil in isolation. They are shaped by the world around them, and that world, if left unchecked, can turn good people into agents of harm. Most people like to think of themselves as good. They believe in fairness, kindness, and justice. They help their friends, follow the rules, and try to do the right thing. But what if being a good person isn't a permanent quality? What if morality isn't something we are, but something we have to maintain? This section explores just how fragile moral identity really is. Goodness isn't set in stone. It's something we build through habits, self-awareness, and constant effort. And if we stop paying attention, it can quietly fall apart. 1. Virtue is a practice, not a trait. Aristotle's view. Let's return to Aristotle, who argued that virtue isn't something you're born with, it's something you practice. In his view, moral excellence comes from repetition. You don't become brave by feeling brave. You become brave by doing brave things over and over again. The same is true for honesty, patience, or compassion. These aren't permanent qualities. They're patterns of action built over time. And just like a muscle, if you stop using them, they weaken. So when we say someone is a good person, we're really saying they've acted in good ways consistently. But if they stop, if they get lazy, selfish, or distracted, they can lose that moral strength. It doesn't mean they're suddenly evil, but it means they're at risk. In other words, moral character is fragile. It needs to be fed, protected, and challenged. Without that, even good people can drift. 2. The illusion of moral immunity. One of the most dangerous beliefs a person can have is this: I would never do that. It sounds reassuring. It makes us feel safe, like we're immune to corruption. But this kind of overconfidence can actually make us more vulnerable. Psychologists call this the better-than-average effect, the tendency for people to believe they're more ethical than others. When we believe we're morally immune, we stop being careful. We stop checking ourselves. We might bend the rules just this once, convinced it doesn't reflect who we really are. But that's exactly how moral decline begins, with small compromises we don't take seriously. The truth is, we're all capable of harm under the right conditions. That's not a reason to live in fear. It's a reason to live with humility. Humility says, I'm not above making mistakes. I need to be careful, honest with myself, and open to correction. That mindset is what protects good people from slipping into harmful behavior, not moral pride, but moral awareness. 3. The shadow within. Carl Jung's insight. The Swiss psychologist Carl Jung believed that every person has a shadow, a hidden part of the self that contains our darker impulses: anger, envy, selfishness, cruelty. These aren't things we want to admit to ourselves, so we push them down. We pretend they don't exist. But ignoring the shadow doesn't make it disappear. In fact, it can make it more dangerous. Jung warned that when we deny our darker side, it has a way of controlling us from the background. It shows up in our worst moments, often when we feel threatened or justified. This is why Jung encouraged people to face their shadow, not to act on it, but to acknowledge it, to see it clearly. By doing that, we gain control over it. A person who understands their capacity for harm is less likely to cause it. Why? Because they're watching. They're not sleepwalking through their choices. They're alert. Facing the shadow is uncomfortable, but it's also empowering. It helps us stay grounded. It reminds us that being good isn't about being perfect. It's about staying awake to who we really are, both light and dark. 4. The danger of a fixed identity. Sometimes people hold on too tightly to the idea of being the good one. They build their identity around being kind, fair, or morally pure. That might sound noble, but it can actually lead to trouble. When our identity is too tightly wrapped around goodness, we may deny our flaws to protect that image. We might say, "I couldn't have hurt anyone. I'm a good person." Or, "That can't be true about me. I would never do something like that." This kind of thinking blocks self-examination. It stops growth. It also makes it harder to admit when we've done something wrong. Ironically, it's the people most obsessed with appearing good who often struggle the most with moral failure. They're so busy protecting their image that they avoid dealing with the truth. The more helpful mindset is this: I want to do good, but I know I'm capable of error. I'm willing to look at myself honestly, even when it's uncomfortable. That's the kind of mindset that leads to moral resilience. If good people can become evil, the next question we have to ask is this: can they come back? Is redemption possible after serious moral failure? And what does it mean to take responsibility for harm you've caused, especially when that harm was done under pressure, ignorance, or fear? This section looks at what it means to face moral failure honestly. How much free will we really have in the choices we make, and how people can rebuild after doing wrong. 1. Can evil be forgiven? When someone does something deeply harmful, whether to one person or many, the idea of forgiveness becomes complicated. Victims may never want to forgive. Society may not want to forget, and the person who did wrong may not even feel they deserve another chance. So, can evil be forgiven? Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting, and it's not the same as excusing. True forgiveness doesn't erase the wrong. It acknowledges it. It says, "This happened. It mattered. It hurt, but you are still human, and you can still change." Some acts may seem unforgivable, but even then, something else becomes possible: accountability. A person who has caused harm may never be fully forgiven, but they can still take responsibility. They can admit what they did, seek to make amends, and choose a different path moving forward. Redemption isn't a clean slate. It's a long, honest walk through what went wrong, and a commitment to never return there. 2. Free will versus determinism. Are we always responsible? One of the hardest questions in ethics is this: do we really have free will? If someone grew up in an abusive home, was taught to hate, lived in poverty, or was trapped in a violent system, how much control did they really have over their choices? If their brain was shaped by trauma, fear, or pressure, are they entirely to blame for what they did? These questions don't have simple answers. Some philosophers argue that we are always morally responsible, no matter the conditions. Others believe that people should be judged based on their intentions, their awareness, or the options they had at the time. In truth, responsibility often exists on a spectrum. Some people have more freedom, more knowledge, and more power than others. Their actions carry more weight. Others may be acting under intense stress, manipulation, or fear. That doesn't mean their actions are harmless, but it may change how we judge them. Still, even if a person had limited freedom in the past, they can gain more freedom moving forward. Once they see the harm they've caused, once they know better, they can choose better. Responsibility begins where awareness begins. 3. The power of guilt and shame. When people do wrong, they often feel guilt or shame. At first glance, those emotions seem similar, but they're actually very different. Guilt says, I did something bad. Shame says, I am bad. Guilt can lead to growth. It motivates people to apologize, make things right, and learn from their mistakes. Shame, on the other hand, can trap people. It tells them they're beyond redemption, that no matter what they do, they'll always be a bad person. For people who've caused harm, guilt is a useful guide. It means their conscience is still alive. But to heal and move forward, they have to let go of shame. They have to believe that change is possible, that their worst actions don't define their entire self. This belief is crucial, not just for individuals, but for society. If we want people to take responsibility, we have to create space for repair, not just punishment. 4. Stories of moral courage and return. Throughout history, we've seen people who fell deeply and then rose again. Some were part of violent systems but turned against them. Others harmed people directly, but later spent their lives trying to make amends. What these stories show is that the same human capacity that allows us to do harm also allows us to heal. Take someone like Oskar Schindler, a businessman who initially profited from Nazi labor camps, but later risked everything to save over 1,000 Jewish lives. Or former extremists who now work to de-radicalize others, using their past to build a better future. What sets these people apart is not that they were perfect. It's that they woke up, they saw the truth, faced it, and chose to change. This is moral courage, the strength to confront your past, take ownership of it, and commit to something better. It's one of the most powerful forms of goodness. We've explored how good people become evil through ignorance, pressure, fear, power, ideology, and even self-deception. But this exploration isn't just about history or theory. It's about now. The systems we live in, the choices we make, the habits we carry. So what can we learn from all this? How do we protect ourselves and each other from slipping into moral failure? How do we stay good in a world that often makes it difficult? Here are some key lessons we can take forward. 1. Don't trust moral complacency. One of the biggest takeaways is this: don't assume you're immune to evil. It's easy to look at the worst moments in history and think, I would never do that. But as we've seen, most of the people who carried out those horrors didn't think they would either. They were parents, teachers, neighbors. They told themselves they were doing the right thing, or they were just trying to get by. The truth is, evil often begins with inaction, with going along, with staying quiet when something feels wrong. So if you want to remain good, don't rely on your self-image. Rely on self-awareness. Keep checking yourself. Ask hard questions. Pay attention to your motivations, especially when you're feeling afraid, angry, or part of a group that's certain it's right. Moral integrity isn't a label, it's a discipline. 2. Strengthen empathy. Through education. One of the best ways to build moral strength is to increase empathy, especially empathy for those who are different from us. And that starts with education. Not just school books and exams, but real education. Learning to listen. Learning to imagine other people's lives. Learning to question what you've been taught, especially when it leads to judgment or fear. The more we understand other people, the harder it becomes to dehumanize them, and the harder it is to justify harm. This kind of education isn't only for children, it's lifelong. Reading widely, listening deeply, traveling with open eyes, and spending time with people outside your usual circle all build moral resilience. They help you stay grounded in shared humanity. 3. Watch for systems that shape behavior. One person's character matters, but so does the structure they're part of. As we saw in the Stanford prison experiment and other studies, environments often shape behaviour more than we expect. That's why it's crucial to build systems that discourage harm and reward accountability. In governments, this means transparency, checks and balances, and an independent press. In workplaces, it means having channels to report abuse and a culture that listens when someone says, "This feels wrong." In schools, it means teaching not just rules but values and encouraging kids to speak up, not just follow along. If the system rewards cruelty or silence, even good people will adapt to it. If the system supports honesty, compassion and responsibility, people will rise to that standard too. We become the systems we participate in, so let's build better ones. 4. Celebrate those who resist. When we talk about moral failure, we often focus on the villains. But we should also look closely at the resistors, the people who said no, even when it cost them everything. Think of Sophie Scholl, who defied the Nazis and was executed for handing out anti-war leaflets. Or the people who hid Jews during World War II, knowing they could be killed for it. Or whistleblowers, who've exposed injustice in modern times, even when it meant losing their careers. These people weren't superheroes. They were ordinary, with doubts and fears, but they found the courage to act. We need to tell their stories, not to put them on pedestals, but to show what's possible. When you celebrate moral courage, you encourage it in others. 5. Speak up early. As we've seen, evil often enters quietly, through small steps, soft language, and minor compromises. That's why it's important to speak up early, while the problem is still small. When a joke feels off, when a policy feels unjust, when someone is being dehumanized, even subtly. Waiting until things are bad enough is often too late. The longer you stay silent, the harder it becomes to act. And yes, speaking up is uncomfortable. It risks social pushback. But it also plants seeds. You might not change the whole system, but you might open someone's eyes. You might prevent the next step. 6. Be kind, but stay awake. Kindness matters. Compassion matters. But neither of these things mean being passive. You can be warm and still hold people accountable. You can be gentle and still be alert. Being a good person isn't about being nice all the time. It's about being awake. To yourself, to others, to the world you're in. It's about acting, not just feeling. Evil thrives when we stop paying attention. So stay human, stay kind, but most of all, stay awake. We began with a difficult truth, that good people can become evil. Not out of nowhere, not by nature, but slowly, through fear, pressure, habit, silence, and self-deception. We've walked through philosophy, psychology, history, and modern life. We've seen how morality can slip, not just through grand decisions, but through small, unexamined choices. And we've seen how systems and stories can shape, even warp, our sense of right and wrong. But this journey isn't meant to leave us hopeless. In fact, it should do the opposite. Because if evil isn't just out there, but something any of us can fall into, then goodness is something any of us can choose every day. Goodness isn't about being perfect. It's about being present, paying attention, questioning ourselves, taking responsibility, and choosing again and again to protect what is human in ourselves and others. It's about understanding that morality is not a destination we reach, but a direction we walk. So let this be the final reminder. Evil doesn't always look like hatred. Sometimes it looks like comfort, or obedience, or silence. But so does the beginning of resistance, quiet, thoughtful, persistent. The power to do harm lives in us. But so does the power to do good. And it's never too late to choose which one we serve.